I'm George Fox, and we're here today to talk about growing up with my friend Keith Kale. And with me are Keith's wife Beth and his daughter Stephanie. And so we're going to follow a bit of a script, but mostly it's free form. So over the past X years, 3 or 4 years, I've been writing down these things. And I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes and think of something, or I'm driving somewhere or whatever. So I end up putting them down. I've just typed this up over the last couple of days with, just items. So it's not necessarily English. It's just my key talking points. And I've tried to group them in what was originally a huge long list, sort of into clumps of topics.
Paragraphs.
Right.
Long bullets.
Chapters.
Big bullets.
Yeah, that's
Chapters.
it. Yeah.
I guess they're chapters is what they are here.
Yeah.
They started out as bullets, and then they ended up
That's
as
right.
chapters.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
Once I started keying, then I realized I'm going to have 50 pages, so we'll keep it down. So, as you know, Keith and I were born in the same year. Keith was 3 weeks older than me, which he reminded me of frequently.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah. And we grew up in Embleton, which is my first topic. And in those days, Embleton had a population of about 1,000 people, and many were related, so you knew everybody. And the main feature was the Allegheny River was right there. That's really why the town was formed in the first place. It was a boat landing. And it's in Venango County, but in the very southeast corner. So as soon as you go anywhere, you're in another county or another town. And it has an oil refinery that was built, I don't know when. Oil was discovered in 1870, about 25 miles away in Titusville. So the whole town was very much affected by the discovery of oil. And the Pennsylvania grade crude oil, when you do all the refining of it and subtract all the gasoline and motor oil and diesel fuel, you're left with paraffin wax. As opposed to Texas crude, you're left with basically tar for paving roads.
I didn't know there was a difference.
Yeah, it is quite a difference. So there were many oil wells around, although no oil wells in the town. I'm not sure why that is, but maybe there was a rule against it. But as soon as you go out in the woods or the fields, there are oil wells everywhere. And they were usually pumped by a central pump house with rod lines going out to the wells and pumping jacks, they call them, that would, as the rod pulled on it, would pull up and pull the rod up in the well, which had a, well, I don't want to go into all the engineering of it, but anyway, that would pump the oil out of the ground. And the machinery was driven by a gas engine that was, you used the gas from the oil wells. Gas was a byproduct in those days. So you used the gas from the well to run this engine. The Howell calls a hit or miss engine. So it would go bam and then choo 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 choo, bam bam. So it would fire irregularly.
The kind of like the old Model Ts that
Yeah.
you see in movies, and they would okay.
Right.
They call it backfires.
They were a little better than this. Anyway, and they try to arrange the mechanism in there so that half the wells were being pulled up as the other half were going down. So it didn't take a lot of power to pump them. And there were there were oil lines going from up on top of the hills down over the river hill, some under the river to the refinery. So a lot of oil got to the refinery by pipeline. That was pretty typical right around the area. And in fact, there was so much oil and so many people involved in it that in the late 1800s, a friend of mine told me this, who's a professor at Penn State. I think he knew what he was talking about. Embleton actually had more millionaires per capita than any city in the world.
Keith always drummed that into my head. Embleton was the richest city
Yeah.
in the world.
So there were quite a few big houses in Embleton as a result.
That's true.
And as I say here, nobody locked their doors. That was unheard of. There was a milkman that went around every day. Well, not every day, but yeah, actually I think it was every day. We had a phone company. The central office was right downtown, and you had to ring the ringer to get the operator's attention. And I remember our number was 10, and Keith's was 7.
I don't know why you remember that, because Keith always told me that you just called up and told her, I want to speak to my dad.
Well, that's the other thing you could do.
And they would know where Alvin was.
That was it. Even when I called Keith, I would say I want to talk to Keith, or I want to have number 7. I don't really remember. The operator would say, "Oh, Keith's not at home. He's over at Gary's." So she'd ring over there.
And see, you didn't need cell phones.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And my Aunt Helen, that we'll talk about later, living on a farm near there. She was on a party line. So everybody's phone would ring at the same time, but each house had a distinctive ring. So hers was like 2 rings, 2 longs. Maybe there's a 3 long and 2 shorts and a long, I don't know. But there were maybe 6 or 8 different houses on the same line. And there was one woman whose name I can't remember, who would listen in to everything. So Helen would be talking along, and she'd say, "Martha, get off the phone." Assuming that she was listening.
Yes.
In other words, this is private coming up. You just get off of there. So that was typical.
So there were no secrets.
No, there were no secrets. And and the other feature of Embleton, besides the river, was the railroad. The Pennsylvania Railroad was there, and we had 2 tracks through the town, and it was very busy. So I think there was something like 5 passenger trains a day that went through Embleton.
Oh, really?
In fact, our first grade teacher lived in Oil City, which is about 50 miles away by train.
Mm-hmm.
Came down by train every morning and went back at night.
It's 50 miles?
By river.
By river, oh.
It's only about 25 by road.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
And you know, to the day he died, Keith was in love with trains and
Yes.
depots, and
Yeah.
that was one
Yeah.
of his huge
Yeah.
Interests.
interests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Passions.
Yes,
Yeah.
he really was. The history of transportation. And he would tell me what you're saying about Embleton was created because it was on the river.
Yeah.
And then the railroad, and I would get the history, 40-minute
Right,
dissertation
right.
on
Yeah.
the history of transportation.
Yeah, and the railroad, of course, followed because that was the easiest grade. You
Correct.
didn't have to go up and downhill.
Correct.
The river already took care of most of that.
I can't imagine Embleton as this bustling metropolis. Can you? I mean, it's so different than
Than it is now, that's
yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
And there was a passenger station that actually I have a painting of the inside. Just benches around. and a big pot-belly stove in the middle for the winter heat. And with all those different passenger trains, of course, they sold tickets and so forth. But there were also a lot of freight trains carrying coal, mostly north. And it's funny, but I never really figured out. I knew that the railroad really started in Pittsburgh, but where he ended up as you go north, I'm not too sure. I think it went to Buffalo, which is where coal would be loaded onto boats, I assumed, and sent wherever. And then I think they hauled iron ore the other way from the lake boats, but that's speculation. And
George, what about post office boxes?
oh, right, we did not have mail delivery in town,
Okay.
so you had to go to the post office to get your mail.
Okay.
And I can't remember our box number. I seem to think it was box 6, but I'm not sure. So you had to go there, and as I recall, I'm not sure the boxes opened. I think you had to talk to the person in there, who would of course know you and say, "Here's your mail." And now out of town there was mail delivery,
Okay.
but in town, no.
Okay.
And in those days, a first class letter was, I think, 3 cents.
Okay.
And back to the railroad a little bit, had steam engines in those days, and of course that meant fire and meant sparks would come out of the smokestacks and start fires on the hillsides. So the hillsides were, regularly fires would be caused by the steam engines. And one of the beauties of going to Embleton High School was, actually the towns around too, the juniors or seniors could join the fire department. So when the siren blew, oh, sorry, I can't take this math course, I'm out of here.
Sorry, gotta save the world.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody run a block over to the fire department and jump on the truck, and off they go to fight a fire. And Alvin was actually the fire chief for quite a few years. He ran Sheffer Chevrolet, which was right next to the fire department, so it was a very convenient arrangement. And the fire trucks were manual shift transmissions with no synchro mesh. If you know what that means, they were what you call crash boxes.
Yeah.
So you had to be an extremely good driver
Okay.
to put the clutch in and be able to change gears. And I can still remember people learning to drive those trucks, be more grinding noises than you ever heard. And then some of the other things that went on in Embleton, we did have hobos who would show up every so often, and
They rode the rails.
they rode the rods.
The rods.
Yeah, the rods under the railroad cars, which supported the cars, so they would hop on them when it was a slow spot, and then ride there just hanging on. You could lay on top of them, sort of. I mean, they're steel rods like this big around, and they came down to the middle of the car. It's like a suspension bridge, sort of held up the middle of the car. So these guys would come around every so often, and I can remember them coming down our street, and my mother would invite them in, give them a sandwich or whatever, and some of them repaired things. And I don't know if they rode the rods or not. The repair guys, one guy sharpened knives,
Okay.
so he had a little cart that he pushed, and he would take all your knives and sharpen them. And another guy fixed umbrellas. So he would say, "You have any broken umbrellas?"
Today we just buy a new one.
Oh, I know. This is a different era by far.
That's great. I didn't. So there were umbrella repairmen.
Yeah, right. And I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how they lived even then.
So with the rods, how far apart were the rods underneath? Apparently not close enough to where a human.
Close enough. They were like this, I think.
Okay, so you could, it was like a hammock kind of.
Yeah.
You could just.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could lay on there.
I thought they were inside the cars themselves. That's the way it was in the movies.
Yeah.
My only
Well,
reference.
sometimes if the car was open and empty, you could get in them, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not something I ever tried.
To this day, every time I go to a new city, I want to see the Railroad Museum that's
Yeah.
there. And I do have a T-shirt recently bought that has all the different symbols that the hobos use. Like on the curb of your house, they would say, "This lady gives out food."
Yeah.
You know, and there was just one little symbol that meant this is an easy touch.
That's right.
So they would write it on the curb.
Yeah. Now, I never noticed it. I read about the same thing later.
Well, I was
But
going to say, you never saw those? They must
I
have
never
had 'em.
noticed them, but I'm sure they were there.
I'm sure
Because
they did.
there wasn't a single guy that didn't stop at our house, as far as I know.
They all knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
How interesting. I had no idea.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so, well, in Embleton, we had the circus would come, every so often by train. So it was quite a process to unload all the animals. And then the only open fields were clear up at the top of the hill. So that all the animals
Okay.
and the wagons would be pulled up the hills, which were not, they were quite steep up Kerr Avenue. And then there was level grounds up there where the school has football field, and it was a whole recreational area where there was a baseball field, and they had lights and so forth. So that would be quite exciting. And you could, as Beth was just saying, you could feed the animals like the elephants directly with peanuts.
Yeah. Directly.
Yeah.
You could walk up to the animals.
And I had an uncle that thought elephant poop was the best thing for the garden you could ever have. So,
So he would go and
it's
collect
like bowling balls. So he would collect that, or you'd ask the circus, and they'd say sure. And we had a Halloween parade every year, and my mother and Aunt Helen would be in it sometimes. And I remember one year, Helen dressed up as a baby, and they had masks on, and rode in a baby carriage, and my mother pushed her, and Helen was smoking a cigar, and she had stockings on, and they put walnuts all around them. I'm not sure why, just big lumps on her legs, and so they were quite a spectacle. But no one knew who they were, and they never told to this day.
Oh, really?
And they'd actually won the thing once at least, because it was a contest too. But they would never take their mask off. So,
So funny.
and then there was every year on Labor Day, there was a horse show that was put on by the fire department up on the top of the hill, and people came from far away. Indiana, Ohio. It went on for years, every Labor Day. So they had horse pulls with draft horses and everything you do in a normal horse show, with different kinds of riding and ribbons and everything. So that was spectacular. And the Boy Scouts parked cars, so that was our job.
You were the valet.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't drive any cars, we just directed them to where to park. So I guess the next topic, I don't know how long this is going to take. I had no idea.
Take your time. Take your time. It's just it dawns on me the meaning of community. The word community comes from that. You know, you don't get that anymore.
Yeah,
I don't. You don't. My
exactly.
generation won't know that.
No, that's right.
Yeah. So.
And especially currently.
They just have their face in their phone.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I remember
Right.
going to Emlenton as a kid, visiting in the summertime and at Christmas, and being amazed that they didn't lock the door to the house.
Yeah.
And just all little things like that stuck in my
Right.
yeah. Because coming from the big city,
Right. Yeah. So.
What a wonderful time to grow up in.
So Keith lived down on Main Street. I don't know what the cross street is. Maybe 2nd or 3rd, but so there was Main Street, which ran more or less east-west, and then they were on the corner of this other street, and then right behind their house was this Roshi Wagon Works that had built horse buggies back in the late 1800s. And then there was the railroad. So his house was literally less than 100 feet, probably 50 or 60 feet from the railroad. And so obviously when a train came, you couldn't talk, so you just stop and then you start again. And I remember somebody visiting there and saying, I guess they'd never been there before, but after a train went by, they said, "Wow, how do you stand that noise?" And somebody said, "What noise?" You were so used to it that you just stopped doing whatever you're doing and you resumed. Mm-hmm. And I can remember the other thing that was funny was going down to Keith's. I would go to his house. I don't know that we ever called ahead or anything. You just show up. And I had this habit. I'd go in his house and I'd always look in the refrigerator. I don't know why to this day. They just sort of expected, okay, it's George. Yeah, he's looking in the refrigerator. So I don't know that I ever took any food out or anything. And so living there at the time was, of course, Alvin and Don and Keith. And I can't remember whether Peg and Dory lived there or not. I have the feeling maybe they did not. I say they
at that
did.
point they
yeah,
lived
I think
there.
they lived with him in a different house.
Peg and Alvin got more marital after he went to the legislature, after Alvin went to the, when he went into politics, it was more important that they be
married.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think before that, it was sort of separate. They were just
They were friends, right.
But you could ask, what's her name that was on the party line? She probably knew all about it.
Exactly. You give me the whole down.
So everybody knew, but
right.
It was still on the down low.
Right. And as I recall, Keith's mother, I don't think I ever met.
I was going to ask you if you remember.
And in fact, she was never discussed. And I know in my family it said that she had some kind of mental issues and she was institutionalized. So that's really all
George,
I
you
know.
may not know, but at the end of her life, she actually, how did it work out? Keith did get a call from somebody that she was in a facility.
Yeah.
I don't like nursing homes, but assisted living type place.
Yeah.
And he went to visit her twice while right towards the end of her life. And we have a nice picture.
We have a nice picture. Yes.
Keith did tell me that actually. Too.
And that was.
Oh, that's really good.
That was very special for Keith
Yeah.
because of what you're saying.
Yeah.
That there was never much of a discussion about the mother during this period of time.
Right.
Actually, what I how he found out about Birdie was Peg Beals, Kale, was visiting a friend in facility, and she saw Birdie's name on it. So when we all went home for Leslie's memorial, that's when Peg told Dad.
Where she was?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Huh.
So
Wow.
that's, yeah. And then he went to see her then, and he went to see her then the following August, because the picture was actually taken on my birthday. It has the date on it of him with his mother. And
Wow.
Yeah. I was so glad that he was able to see her. It was,
Right.
yeah.
But that was,
Yeah.
we know how many years later.
Yeah.
Before what we're doing here.
Yeah. Yeah.
After what we're doing here.
That's right. Yeah. So, then at the time, Alvin owned the Chevy dealership. I think he owned it. He certainly managed it. I'm pretty sure he owned it.
He managed it first, and then he bought it from Sheffer.
Okay.
Is my understanding.
All right.
Sheffer started it and put Alvin in charge, and then
I think it started in Knox.
yeah, right.
Really, and then
right.
they put. I don't know if the whole thing moved. I think they just started a branch in Emlenton, and then that.
I think you're right.
Didn't Dad say that Alvin washed cars for him when it was in Knox, and then he told him one day, I'm going to buy this place, and then he did? That's what Dad told me one time.
Could have been. I
Yeah.
never heard that story. Yeah, that. Yeah, very possible. Yeah, Alvin was really a go-getter, and.
Yeah. I'd forgotten this. Alvin also, if he was fire chief, that's good, but he also had the keys to the jail.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Because, again, I think the jail was right close to Sheffer Chevrolet.
I think it was. That's right.
And there were times when they would put a hobo or two in the jail
Just to sleep the night. Yeah.
and they got a good meal
Yeah.
and a shower
Right.
and,
And off they went.
going back to the hobos. They took care of the hobos.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
the good hobos, the
Yeah.
ones that were helpful.
And you didn't see those people, but maybe every 3 weeks or months go by, you wouldn't see anybody. So it wasn't like there was a crowd or anything.
Yeah.
And yeah, so as time went on, Alvin got elected to be a county commissioner, I believe, and then the state legislature, and then introduced legislation to develop a lake that's called Kale Lake. I've been there like once. I don't know if I could even find it. But,
You can find it online. There's a
Is
lot
that-
a lot of information about
Oh, is
it
that
online.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah, that's what my grandchildren always say. It's always the last thing
It's
I
online.
think of.
Google
Yeah,
it.
Google it, right. So during that time, Keith and I did all kinds of projects because the Roshi Wagon Works was just a treasure trove of pieces of wood, pieces of steel. It was actually 2 stories with a garage door on the first floor. So you could take a vehicle in there if you wanted to, although it was always so jammed I don't think you ever could. So that was where we did a lot of our work. And then later on they moved to River Avenue, which was on the other side of the tracks, although in Emlenton there was no differentiation which side of the tracks you're on.
There was no wrong
Mattered
side
to
of the
nobody.
tracks.
Yeah, there was
Yeah.
no wrong side or right side. So the same distance from the railroad, but towards the river instead of away from the river, and more in the middle of town. And now that I'm thinking about it, I think maybe Peg Beals was living in a house next door when they first moved there. I'm not sure. So at that time, you know, I was with Keith quite a lot. I can't figure out how old I was in any of these things, but I left Emlenton when I went to 9th grade, so I know it was before that. Although we I was only in Seneca, which is near Oil City,
Oh.
25 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
And shortly after moving, I could drive, so we went back and forth. Elvin's saying was, Jesus Christ, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
was like just part of his
Vernacular.
Exactly, right, which meant nothing. He just ignored that part.
I didn't know that came from Alvin.
Yeah.
I used that myself.
Oh, right. We used to call him Old Jesus Christ, in other words.
You probably like that.
He probably did. And then I was so into electricity and doing things with radios and everything, he used to call me Marconi.
Oh, okay.
So he said, so you know who Marconi
No.
is? Okay. He was an Italian that actually was the first person to transmit radio waves across the ocean.
Oh.
Invented the first radios that were used. They were used for ship to shore, mostly for safety
Okay.
reasons. This is back in the early 1900s. So that was Alvin's idea of ribbing me, I'm
Yes.
sure. At least I never electrocuted myself, but
We're grateful for that.
yeah, right. And some of the things that went on at that house, every Saturday, the boys and Alvin cleaned the house. That was the rule.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't do laundry, they sent laundry out. So you'd put all the laundry together and count everything. How many underwears, how many socks. And you'd also be getting the package back from the previous week. So you go through and reconcile it. And do we have 10 socks and 20 shirts and whatever it was. And then they'd argue with the laundry, of course, then it got lost. And so you'd be counting the new shipment that went off. I don't know how it got there. I think the laundry was in Oil City. So they must have picked it up or something. One of the things that they liked to cook, that Alvin liked to cook, was he'd make a fried egg sandwich. So we had those frequently on white bread with mustard. And we'd have to clean the skillet. In those days, cast iron skillet, of course, there's no Teflon or anything. And they actually boil the skillet with soap in it to clean it out, which they say never to do, but that's what they did.
Did you have the thing of grease on the stove? Did they do that? Maybe that's a Southern thing.
I don't recall, but it's entirely possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and they cooked. I mean, I don't remember what we ate, nothing spectacular.
Was Alvin one of the only bachelors in town? Kind of was that an anomaly or?
I would say so. There were a few, very few. I really can't think of anyone else right offhand.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was unusual.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you do have to give it to Alvin for taking those boys and
Oh yeah.
I mean, whatever the other circumstances were, he
Yeah.
got those boys raised and educated.
No, he stepped up to it, and
Yep.
he was very civic-minded. He was on the school board, and he was involved in Boy Scouts.
Oh, was he?
As a scout, they call them scouters, people that are on boards and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's how. And my father was involved in the Scouts the same way. He was an accountant. So that's how Keith and I got jobs, like at the camp. You know, you didn't see the ad in the paper and send it in. You know, everything was done by networking, we call it today.
Mm-hmm.
So Ellen was very much a community person.
I'll say, when did he have time to do anything?
I don't know. Well, it was
that's-
slower times.
Yes, that's true. And that probably was
but,
your social life.
You know, he was up and out early. He was not didn't mess around. He was always doing something. And
Yeah, I think Keith was always a little perturbed with Alvin because Alvin would get up and go.
yeah,
And Keith was not that
Right.
good in the morning.
no, that's right. Yeah, Keith and I are the same pretty much. And at that second house, we didn't have the Roshi wagon work anymore, but he had a shop in the basement where we used to build things.
Alvin did?
Yeah, Alvin in the house. And I think, I'm not sure if I'm pretty sure they rented the first house. And maybe rented the second one, I don't really even know. That was unusual, you know, people I knew didn't rent houses.
Oh, yeah.
And we lived on Highland Avenue, which was about 4 or 5 blocks up the hill, pretty steep hill. And in the same general areas, west, east and west. And we had a big lawn. That house was built by my grandfather also, George Fox, in 1920s.
Is that house still there?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to look it up.
Yeah, my sister says it's not in nearly as good repair as it used to be. But it had a big yard that was totally sloped, and went from Highland Avenue, and on the river side of Highland Avenue, it drops off abruptly, so there's no houses on that side. And in fact, where Peg was living on Hill Street was really, I think, right below our house, but I think it's one house
Oh, really?
to the right. Yeah.
Okay.
And so I lived there with my parents, and my parents had 2 sets of boy girl with 11 years in between. So my brother Jack was 13 years older than me. He's passed away now. And my sister Marilyn's 11 years older. Then I have my younger sister's 2 years younger than I am. And that house was 3 real stories and then a basement. So the attic was finished, and my brother used to play soldiers up there, and by that he had miniature soldiers, these cast iron soldiers about this high. They're pretty big. And so we would have these elaborate games up there with the soldiers. And by the way, I don't know what Jack's wife did with all the soldiers. She had them in New York City, where she lived. But they're extremely valuable. The cheap ones are lead, but the really good ones are cast iron. And they were all painted up and to be various people in the Army. And Jack and his friend Hugh Gilmore had invented this whole game system of you would take a marble and you could shoot it with your thumb from next to one of the soldiers and try and knock over one of the opponent's soldiers.
Oh.
And in each round, a soldier could move 2 of these stick lengths. See, it's like a foot long stick. And
They had the rules of war laid
yeah,
out.
and Jack sent me the rules.
Okay.
They hand wrote. I still have it somewhere. But he was an accountant, so he wrote them on the green paper that accountants use. It's real long. I think it was 3 pages of solid writing of all the different rules of what vehicles could do and what foot soldiers could do.
Oh, that was
And,
neat for you and Keith, though.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So
I can see. Yes.
So we had our own. So when Jack was living at home, still at home, his rule was do not touch the soldiers. Everybody's afraid to even go in the attic. But once he went off to school, and Keith and I, we had a run of the place. So we continued the same game. So we.
Did you still follow the rules after?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, no, they.
Oh, I bet you
they were
made up some of your own.
We
too.
might have.
I know.
They were
I know
pretty
you
practical.
two.
Yeah, I'm sure we did.
Yeah.
And then the other thing we used to do up there was the window to the attic was like 3 stories off of the front porch, but then the land went straight down to the road. So we used to fly planes, either gliders or I think we even flew power planes. And I can't remember if we ever set planes on fire and then flew them out of there. I sort of imagined that we might have. And then in the basement, I had one room that was totally a model railroad set up.
Too cool.
And
Too
it
cool.
was, we put all these boards across, just like joists in a house, and then uprights, and then boards along the top, and then the track. So it was all contoured. And then we build land out of screen and plaster Paris, and painted. We had all this stuff going on, and we used my track and Keith's track, sort of combined everything. His track was a little different than mine, but they would plug together, all Lionel trains. And so we played with that quite a bit. And later, the guy that had the supermarket at the corner of Main Street and Kerr Avenue, his name was Taylor, I think, he wanted some attraction at Christmas. So he talked to us about, he wanted trains. He had these shelves up halfway up the walls around three sides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we put the track around,
Yeah.
and we set this whole thing up for him with a passenger train that would just go around and, round and round around the supermarket. So then I think after we did that a couple of years, he finally bought that train set from me, I remember, for $75. So
That was pretty good.
yeah, it was. That was a lot. At least I thought so. So
That's funny.
yeah, and Beth and I had already talked about Keith and I were related to each other, and my brother Jack, who did the genealogy of my family, wrote me a letter once, which I still have if I can find it. My secret is I never throw anything out, but finding it is another issue. So
We understand.
yeah, right. So he explained how Keith and I are actually related through two different family lines, but I couldn't tell you right now what they are.
Well, you said everybody in Emlenton was pretty much related.
They
so.
were one way or another. Yeah, that's right. No big surprise.
I wonder if it's in the Kale, if we could figure it out. Peg did a Kale genealogy
Right,
book.
yeah. I know Beth was telling me. It probably is in there in some way. And my brother Jack did, he documented everything. In fact, just as an aside, the two Fox brothers arrived from Germany in 1748 to Philadelphia on a boat called
Wow.
the Two Brothers. And they came from an area in Germany, and my sister Nancy, he found out what town they came from. And so Nancy went back there, and she's actually talked to our relatives in Germany, and it was really wild because they all have records in the Bible. They keep Bibles
Sure.
with all these written records, and so at least two of them had these Bibles that showed the two brothers as leaving for America, and then it was blank. They didn't know what happened.
Oh,
So they all jumped on her with both feet because they want to fill in their whole record. So, and they have it all computerized. So they gave Nancy
good.
this printout that covers half of that wall. All these glued together pieces of paper in colors. All these boxes that go off into all the offspring, and then so they really want to do the same thing for the American side. And that's what Jack did. He did all that work and figured out down to now how we all connected together. And Nancy had spent time, she's a musician. She and her husband had lived a year in Salzburg, so she speaks German.
Okay.
So it's relatively easy. And just as an aside, the other half of my family from my mother is the Lynns, now spelled Lynn. And my grandfather Lynn, where Helen lived, always said they were Scotch-Irish.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jack found out that wasn't true at all. They were German also.
Oh,
Linn. And he traced them back and found out they came from about 100 miles south of where the foxes came from.
Oh.
So she's also visited them. And the Lynns are kind of wild and crazy people, and the foxes are much more staid. And the Fox area is more like closer to speaking High German, and the Lynns are in an area in southern Germany that speaks a different dialect, not that different, but so she found that actually she felt those families sort of mirrored the way we feel about our sides of the family.
So it's inherited.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're not going too fast. I don't know when we're going to run out of video, but and if you got to walk around or something, we can stop the machine. So the next thing was the schools. Are we going okay, or is this?
Yeah, this is
like,
great. I'm enjoying this.
Okay.
In my mind, I'm putting pieces together of
Yeah.
the stories that Dad would tell me,
Yeah.
and it's reminding me, and I'm also realizing where some of traits came from.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Or interest,
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah.
That's it's interesting. It's
Oh, the other thing I skipped about Keith living on River Avenue. I mentioned they're turning back the speedometer. They had a Ford Fairlane, and Alvin would write the mileage down and keep a note of the car mileage. So if he had to go somewhere for the weekend or the day, he would check and make sure Keith didn't drive 500 miles over the weekend. Well, yeah. So one weekend, I'm pretty sure Keith went to see Peggy,
Mm-hmm.
and in Franklin, and I don't know where they drove to, but there were a lot of miles on the car afterwards. So he's telling me this is like Sunday. Oh shit, we gotta do something here. So we went through the whole thing. Well, you can go in reverse, but that takes like forever. Run the speedometer
This is
backwards.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I don't know if you've
Right.
ever seen the same thing.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah, actually I remember that story.
Where they take the Ferrari, I think it is, his dad's Ferrari,
Yeah.
and they run it in reverse.
That's right.
And it goes flying out the window. This is
Jeez.
it's the same thing.
So we decided that, okay, we got to take the speedometer apart. We can't figure out any other way to do it. So we start taking it apart. And of course, it's all spring loaded and everything. Springs are shooting all over the front seat. And so we're saying, oh my God. Somehow we got it all back together with the adjusted mileage. And this was a Ford Fairlane, and it had a sort of window in the dashboard. The dash came up over the speedometer. You look through it down here,
Mm-hmm.
but there was an opening, a glass covered or plastic covered opening on the top to let light in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we got it all back together, and there's a huge thumbprint right in the middle of that upper thing. And we're saying, oh man. And that was one of the first things you put back. So
Right. Oh.
So we just left it. But Alvin never noticed.
Never
it.
noticed the
Oh,
thumbprint.
Alvin never said anything.
He never said anything. Right.
Maybe the fact that they did all that, made
Yeah,
all that
he
effort
was-
to put it back together. He was going to let you slide on that one.
That's right. Yeah.
No, I think Alvin was he never maybe told them directly, but I think Alvin was very proud of his boys and
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
because you all were inventive.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that's the right word.
Yeah, we never got into...
That applies, widely.
Y'all were very intelligent and were able to figure things out. And I think there were times that Alvin just let things slide.
We never got into real big trouble.
I didn't even know Alvin that well, but I just
think
kept
that's the
reading
probably
between the lines.
accurate assessment now that I'm older and can look back at it. We built this little gun that was to be part of our soldier games. So it's basically a half-inch copper pipe, half-inch diameter, about this long, and we had it was in a piece of wood, and in the back of it we had a little plate you could put in a slot, and we put a firecracker in the back of the gun, and then you'd put a half-inch dowel rod in the front, and then you'd light the fuse in the firecracker, and the dowel rod would go shooting out. I mean, it would go a long ways. So we must have spent, I don't know, over a year messing with this thing one way or another. So then we got this idea, well, we should have armor-piercing shells. So
oh, yes.
Right. So then in the little dowel rod that's going to shoot out, we drill a 1/4-inch hole and put a steel rod that we'd have pointed. So that would go flying out. And of course, there was no rifling in the thing, so I'm sure it really just tumbled end over end, so it wouldn't have probably hurt anything. We never, the idea was to shoot vehicles in our soldier game. Then we thought, well, they have shells that explode.
Oh, no.
So then we would drill the hole down the shell casing to almost to the back end of it, and we put a tiny hole there. We slide a firecracker in there, put the fuse out the back of the shell, and then we figured out you had to cut it off the fuse would be about this long, because you want to go off, you didn't want it to land and then go off 5 seconds later. And then we put the steel piece in front of that, then we shoot that off. So bam, the firecracker would go off, and then the shell would go bam, way up in the air or whatever you did.
It's amazing you have all your fingers.
Yeah,
really.
It is. So we always had a pretty good supply of firecrackers. So one day, I don't know why, we just decided, we should have a real fireworks show today. I'm not sure we even decided it. So this was at the first house. So we started throwing these cherry bombs and firecrackers. We were making a hell of a noise for a long time. And the next thing we know, we hear a siren coming. So it's the town cop. His name was Scrooge Weller. Where he got that name, I have no idea. Keith ran into the shop, and as I recall, I'm not sure about this, but I think he dove into a barrel we had there, a big wooden barrel that had some little stuff in it, and his feet were sticking up. And I ran around the corner. And of course, Scrooge, who knows us,
Yeah.
Okay, boys, you're a really disturbing piece. So he gave us a big lecture. Stop doing that. Don't do that anymore. And that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
Drove off.
But that was the way. I mean, because it was a small community and everybody knew everybody.
Yeah.
And you knew darn well that both your parents heard about all of this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
It wasn't that you got away with anything.
Right, that's right. Yeah. There was another friend of ours, Lynn Dobbensbeck. He later went in the service. He used to sit on his back porch. I think it was on the second level of a house, and his yard went up like this. He used to shoot chipmunks with a 44-40, which is, a half-inch diameter bullet almost, and in town. So, I mean, today you would be arrested 17 ways from Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
And he didn't do it often, but every so often there'd be this big bam, and then we'd be talking to him later. Oh yeah, I got another one. And
That's so funny.
So it's
In
kind
the middle of town.
of yeah, right in the middle of town. Gosh. So we're up to the school. We went to the Embleton School, which was, you've seen, right there in town.
Beautiful building.
Yeah, no longer used as a school. They opened up a district school, but and it was grades 1 to 12, no kindergarten in those days, and there were about 20 students in Keith and my class, and so we went to school there up through the grades. I listed the teachers down here.
Can you believe he remembers all of his teachers' names?
Up to grade 7.
Yeah, if you think about it, if you start thinking about it, you remember a lot of them at least.
Yeah.
How because they're influential. And
Yeah.
they were authority figures.
That's right, for sure.
So.
You know, I can still remember them very well and tell stories about them. And if you lived in town like Keith and I, you walked to school.
Sure.
And for some kids, it was a pretty long walk. And outside of town, you took the bus. And and at some point, I don't know what grade we were in. It must have been at least 6th grade. We were the co-captains of the safety patrol. So we had these badges and white belts that we put over our coats. And so we'd help the little kids across the streets. And we had, I don't know how many lower level people working in the same, it must have been at least a half dozen of us all together. So, not that kids got run over in those days or anything.
Yeah.
I don't even know if there were crosswalks. But,
It's like the old-timey version of the hall monitor.
yeah, right. Well, this was out on the streets, though. We'd be down on Main Street, where kids walking up from down below would cross.
So if there were 20 kids in your class, how many students total were in the school? 12 grades?
Yeah.
That
Well,
wouldn't have been that many.
No, a few hundred.
Yeah.
I don't think any grades are much different than that.
Okay.
And then, it was the town and then the surrounding townships. And then in 8th grade, Rockland, which is a pretty big township up the road, came to Embleton. So that at least doubled the size of the class. So they were there 2 years in Embleton. And the weird thing was, I was in Embleton through 8th grade, and then went to Seneca. And the Rockland kids came to the Seneca school later. So here I am going into, I think, my junior year, or 10th grade, I don't know which. Here comes all these kids that I knew from Embleton because they had been there. So that was sort of fun. So I knew the whole group. So I went to Cranberry Area High School in Seneca, and it covered the whole area around there. A lot of farm kids. There was the kids in Seneca, which is a real small little town outside of Oil City, walked to school. It was about a half a mile from me, and then there were a lot of buses. And a lot of farm kids who were big. So I didn't really realize I was average size until I went off to college and discovered, people are the same size I am. They aren't all 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. And of course, down near Pittsburgh is where all the football kids come from that are really super football players, professionals. So many of them come from that area.
But Keith stayed at Embleton.
He stayed, yeah, he was there.
And I think his last year was the last year that there was that it actually was grades through 12.
Okay, that I don't know.
I think that's true. I think at 58, then they all consolidated into the great big
Yeah.
township thing, that everybody was in. So he was
Right.
his class was the last to graduate from Embleton.
Right, I see.
I'm pretty sure that's right.
Yeah. So his class ended up 20 graduated.
Mm-hmm.
So they had this big bump in the middle, but then they went away.
Mm-hmm.
So it's back to 20 again.
Right,
And,
right.
So for alumni, Bill Whitehill, who sort of does the alumni stuff for our class, he includes the people like me that left, that were allowed to participate in the Alumni Association. And I went to a meeting with my sister Marilyn years ago, and they had quite a discussion about whether they should include the people from the Allegheny Valley School, which is where they went now.
Okay.
The big consolidated, and everybody voted no.
No.
You had to graduate from Hamilton High School or forget it. And of course, I pointed out, well, you're going to be a dying group. It's okay. That's the way we want it. So that's just what's happening. It's, getting smaller and smaller.
Well, and now I'm sure it's very, very small.
Yeah.
There's
So
only a few of them.
that's
left.
right. So what else we got here? So they do have a reunion every June of anybody that graduated from Hamilton.
Do you go every June?
No, I go every once in a while,
Okay.
but not that often. Yeah, they just meet at the truck stop now.
Oh, the Quaker State truck stop?
Yeah.
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 I have pictures of Alvin and all of us there. That's so funny.
Yeah. Well, I have a picture too. Of it
What's
somewhere.
this Memorial Day parade to the cemetery?
Yeah, every Memorial Day, the high school band would lead a parade up Kerr Avenue, which is pretty steep, to the cemetery, where we would play music, and then one of the kids would give the Gettysburg Address. And that was a contest to see who would get to give it. You had to do it from memory, of course. And
407 years ago.
yeah.
That's as far as I can get.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I could go a little bit more. And the high school band was something else. You got into it, and I was in music all my life. Keith rather never did. I don't know why. So I played the mellophone horn, which is because my brother had played it before, which is a French horn, but right-handed. The French horn goes to the left, and you play the keys this way. The mellophone is like for band, and it goes this way, and you play it with your right hand. So you can play the trumpet or the mellophone or the baritone horn that I played later. All have the same fingering. So once you know one, you're all set.
Okay.
Anyway, so I have a picture somewhere in a yearbook I can show you of me and the band. We had these uniforms with capes, and so the band, you got in it when you were in 3rd or 4th grade, up to seniors. So you can imagine the size range of people. then trying to march up the hill.
That's funny.
And Fred Colonna, Mr. Colonna, was the music guy, and so I think he had a lot to say about what instrument you picked up. You didn't just have your parents and work it out like you do today, and there'd be 10,000 flute players and nobody else, or whatever happens. So he had a pretty balanced group, and I think that was he did it himself.
Oh.
And he spoke fair English, but he was obviously Italian. And then I saw in one of the later yearbooks, his son came in and took over after him. They were there together for a while.
That's nice.
So every year that was the band would do that march up the hill. And you had concerts and things.
Not an easy place to be in a band.
Yeah.
You really had to
That's right.
hoof it up those hills.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of crazy. The kids that could barely,
and blow a horn at the same time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, they didn't make you do that. Well, I don't know. I can't remember if we played any music going up the hill. I somehow don't think that'd be possible.
We're the Boy Scouts and Explorers Scouts.
Okay.
Troop 41.
Right.
Should have figured that out before you had me resign.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The Boy Scouts met, I can't remember how often, in the basement of the bakery, which was right next to the railroad tracks, above where Keith was in the second house, and where now the bridge crosses the river. So all those buildings are gone. And in the basement where we met, there was a pool table.
Oh, how convenient.
And Keith was very good at pool. I don't know if you knew this, but
No, I didn't know that.
he pretty much, no one could beat him.
Really?
He was really good at calculating the angles.
Ah,
You know.
that makes sense.
And so I couldn't touch him.
Huh.
And so that was our amusement. And you could get in that room at other times, so I think he secretly went up there and practiced. But I don't know about that. And the scout leaders at that time, John Beals was one of them, who was Skip Beals' father,
Okay.
who was in our class.
Right.
And there were several men who worked with us, and most of them had something to do with working in the oil fields. So, which meant they spent a lot of time in the woods, because that's where the wells were. And so those guys knew everything about trees, plants, animals, animal tracks. So
Interesting.
it was really something. So we would go on hikes sometimes, led by various people, IDing plants and animals. And we had knot tying contests. And I can still remember you had to tie, you used several ropes. And you'd tie one knot around your waist, a couple other knots. I guess you had to tie 8 or 10 knots. And I can still remember the last thing you had to do was tie a clove hitch around your left leg. Well, I really practiced. I was way faster than anybody. But the last time I tied a clove hitch, I did it wrong. So I got tossed out.
You didn't get the badge? You didn't get your knot tying badge?
Yeah, right. I don't think it was a badge. I don't even know. I guess it was part of the one of the lower grade levels of the scout thing. Anyway, I can still remember today how I tied it wrong and how to tie it right. Now somebody pointed out here, if you do it this way, you can't go wrong. And I've done a lot of sailing, and I still can remember all those knots. I learned from them. And none of my kids or grandchildren can even come close to. I've tried to teach them how to tie a bowline, which is a pretty standard sailor's knot. It's hopeless. I just have to tie it for them. So that was one thing we did. And we had contests. This was with other troops, sometimes at Camp Kaufman or other places. And Keith and I always did the signal flags. So you have a flag on the end of a maybe 4-foot long pole, and you dip it to the left for a dot. You'd use Morse code. So to the left was a dot, to the right was a dash. Then when you're done with a word, you dip it down to the front. So that's how we learn Morse code. So, and Keith and I were very good at it. So we'd go back and forth across this field, and you'd have, I really can't remember the details, but everybody would have the same text they had to send. And so you had to send the whole thing, and they'd time you. And so faster was better. So we did that. We used to build towers out of ironwood logs because they were really strong, and be all tied together with sticks and cross braces with rope. No metal anywhere.
Towers?
They'd be like 20 feet high. You put 4 saplings, you cut them down and build. You'd build 2 sides on the ground with all the cross braces, and then hold them up and put the other cross braces. Then the idea was you could go up on the top of that and do signaling to go longer distances. But I don't know that we ever did that much. Usually it was just across the field, the signaling part. In the summer, the troop would go to Camp Kaufman, which was the scout camp I'll talk about a little later. And we'd spend a week there as a troop. And we'd go winter camping, and I can remember still, Keith taught me a lot of things. We'd always cook. So you'd take a number 10 can, which is a commercial size can, this big around, that high, and make beef stew or something like that. So we had it down pretty good. You know, you cook the meat first in the bottom, and then you add all the other stuff in the water, and you had to carry all that with you.
Okay.
And I can remember that we'd build a fire. We're cooking over an outdoor fire. And I'd always build the fire up by putting the logs in the fire that's burning the most. And so I noticed that my fire would creep away from me, you know, because the burning side would be on the left, and you keep putting logs there, it would keep going to the left further. So Keith pointed out to me one day, you know, you got to put the wood where you want the fire to be in the future. So you don't put it in the flames. You put it on the other side. And eventually it would catch it.
Planning.
Yeah,
Planning for the future.
That's right. So I can still remember him telling me that.
That's very interesting, because, you know, in later life, Keith did most of the cooking for us.
Yeah.
I mean, he retired before I did, and he always seemed to enjoy.
Right.
And he would try new things. That was he didn't go by the recipe, or he'd look at a recipe and then but we could add corn to this. That would make it.
Right.
You know, he was always good at that. So
Right.
Must
That's
be where he started.
Yeah, for sure. So we would camp in the snow in the wintertime out in the woods, and with a group. And that
Did
was,
you sleep in tents or?
Yeah, in a tent.
And sleeping bags and
Sleeping
on
bags,
the ground?
On the ground. The tents had floors in them.
Oh, okay.
Usually. So even if you had snow, you'd either dig it away or just put the
But
tent
I
on
remember
top of
him
it.
saying you could go and get pine branches,
That's right.
lots of pine branches.
Yeah.
Put them down, and then put the tent on top.
That's what we
So
usually
the floor,
did.
and that way you're
Oh, that's smart.
insulated from the ground.
Right. It's
right.
like your yeah, it's your layer of insulation.
That's your
That's
feather
right.
top pillow.
Yeah.
Early down.
Right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, hemlock was very good for that because it wasn't sharp. So
Oh,
that's true.
Now, see, if I were stranded in the middle of nowhere and it was snowing, now I would be able to survive. Thank
Yeah.
you for the survival
There
tip.
you are.
This is just a jewel of information.
So we already talked about the horse show in Ellington, and the Ground Observer Corps. After the war.
He loved that.
Yeah,
He talked about that many times.
right.
Yeah.
After the war, there was a concern that Russia was going to bomb the U.S. So I'm not sure under whose auspices the Ground Observer Corps was formed, but Keith and I ended up being volunteers, and this older guy, Andy Rapp, well, older to us, he wasn't that old, actually built a shed behind the house. He lived way up on top of the hill. And I think he was subsidized to build that. And Keith and I helped him build it. And it was our first experience with doing drywall and sheetrocking and, you know, putting the tape on the seams and everything. We were probably 12 years old. So we're trying to do this, but we did it, painted it and everything. He had a phone line in there. And so we'd go up there and watch the sky for planes. And then you'd call you'd call a number on the phone, and you'd report the plane, type of plane, the altitude and direction it was going in. And so you were trained to figure out, you didn't have to identify the plane, but you had to be able to tell whether it was single engine planes you ignored. They couldn't go far enough. Or even 2 engine, but 4 engine, those are the ones you did. And you had
to stay up all night.
Yeah, we went. Yeah, it was more or less around the clock with various people. And our call sign was Lima Metro 11 Black. So the guy'd answer at Pittsburgh. One thing I was disappointed in, we never went down there to see what they actually did. But I think they had one of those big boards with the sectors marked off and probably a slider for each plane. And if it was really cloudy, you'd say, you know, one plane, unknown altitude, unknown direction. But you'd still call it in, even though you couldn't figure.
Did you guys do that together, or was it just one person?
No, Keith and I always went together.
Okay.
So one of us would call it in.
Okay.
I don't know, we took turns or what we did. But, so you just sit there and talk to each other until you hear a plane. Then you go out and try and figure it out and call it in. And we were pretty close to an airline route, which in those days was marked by those beacons.
Yes.
I think that this was a little after the beacons were really that big a thing, but they were still there. So across the country, like from New York to Chicago, there are beacons at night with lights.
But before radar.
Is that the light that goes around?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they all had a red flasher to indicate it's not
some
an
of
airport.
Some of them were just, you know, I mean, it wasn't as sophisticated as you think.
Yeah, it was just a rotating searchlight, really, on top of a tower, and a red light that was with it that I think blinked, and a green light next to it meant it was an airport. And these lights went clear across the country at 12-mile intervals or something like that. So as I understand it, if you're up in a plane, which I never was at that point, you could see 10 of these things out across ahead of you. So it's just like a highway to follow.
Yeah, that's how they knew. Like I say, before radar, that's how they knew.
Right. That they were in the lane. They were staying in the lane, so to speak.
Right. So if you're going west, you had to be at a certain altitude. Going east, same beacons.
So that's how they
but
made sure you
different
didn't hit each other.
Yeah.
Okay. Direction altitude was based on direction.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And then you follow the beacons.
So because one of those, we were pretty close to an east-west route. I think it was from New York to Chicago. There's quite a bit of plane traffic. So it wasn't really that boring sitting out there waiting for a plane to fly by. And a lot of times, like I said, it was overcast, so all you know is you hear it. You didn't know where it was going or how high it was. So that went on for, I don't know, a couple of years at least.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't realize you did it that long.
Yeah. No, I think it off and on.
Yeah, yeah.
I think we went hot and heavy at first, but then it was less and less. So then as far as the scouts, we went up through the ranks, then got into the merit badges. And usually you got a lot of merit badges when you went to Camp Kaufman because of the whole staff there to help you do things. And Keith and I actually got the Pro Deo et Patria Award, which is sort of like a super merit badge. It's for God and country, so we did it through the Lutheran Church, which I was part of. And I think Keith actually joined the church to do that.
Oh, okay.
And we had to
There
write.
had to be a reason why he joined, and it was the Scouts.
Yeah. So we had to write a paper to get that. And so Keith wrote on his faith, and I really wish I had that paper.
Really?
It's probably somewhere. He was really
I've never seen that.
much more of a philosopher. I was more of an engineer.
I would love to see that.
So I wrote on the history of that church because it was my great-grandfather that started the church in Emlenton. So I had a
That's a
strong connection.
connection.
Yeah.
Well, as a side note, because I don't think it's in here, my memory of what Keith said about the church, about joining the church, is that you and he had this contest going about who could remember which Sunday it was and what the prayer was going to be. Well, you know, the whole order of service.
Right.
Because these two were very
Competitive.
and very intellectual. I mean,
Right.
they wanted to have all this down, and that's why he was interested in church.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why. Okay, so there was a reason. It was. It was.
that you guys were very much into the order of the service,
Right.
and knowing exactly what was coming next and what page to be on it.
Right.
Not
Yeah.
necessarily content, but order.
That's it. Right.
Got it.
That's true.
I'd forgotten that.
Yeah. So,
So your great grandfather started the church.
right. Yeah. Yeah, he was a German minister.
The Lutheran church you're talking about.
Lutheran church, yeah.
Yeah.
It's right across from the school.
It's a beautiful. You've seen it.
Yes.
Little white.
Yeah.
Are there any other churches in Emlenton?
Oh,
There's
yeah.
a lot of them.
Are there? Okay.
Yeah. I wrote that down somewhere in
Okay.
here, but there's like,
I haven't gotten there.
well, there was, probably 6 or 7 churches in a town that
Of
small.
1,000 people.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Do the math on that.
Yeah. Right. But that was true, and they were all active. The Lutheran Church now is down to, there is a minister, and I think there's only like less than 5 members, so I think they still have services, and they have a big endowment, so they don't really hurt for money. And my sister Nancy, my sister Nancy has cancer.
Oh,
She has pancreatic cancer, so it's not a good one. So until she got sick, she wanted to buy the church and convert it into, she's a musician, to make it into a place where people could do performances, and then redo the basement, which has a kitchen and bathroom, into an apartment, so somebody could rent it out and would pay for the maintenance of the church. So she got some people interested, and I don't know if it's going to happen or not. And if you close the church, the synod takes all that money.
Oh, yeah.
The Pittsburgh synod that has over all the churches.
Okay.
So I think they're sort of sitting on the edge of their chair, drooling over. It's like $1 million or something that they would get if it did go under.
So much for the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
Is Nancy in Emlenton?
No,
or?
she lives in Ocean City, New Jersey.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Another topic.
Got it.
So anyway, as far as scouts, Keith went on to become an Eagle Scout. I made it to life, and then which is under Eagle. Then I don't know. I sort of lost my steam. I loved doing the merit badges, but there were some other people that I won't name. Just like any time in life, you have people that want to do the very minimum to get the award. So that sort of upset me, that there were people getting these merit badges without really doing the things you're supposed to do. And so I just said, the heck with it. And then the Order of Arrow is an honorary organization within the Scouts that you get elected to. Keith and I were both part of that. You get elected by the other Scouts, by your colleagues. So we could skip down to Camp Kaufman here. I'll come back to other things. So as a result of our scouting work, we ended up working at the Boy Scout camp 2 summers, I think it was. And so Keith was the cook for the staff, and I was maintenance and repair. So that we had a great time. And it was, there were, I'm not sure about the numbers, there were 10 campsites, I think, where troops would come, like the Embleton group would have one campsite for a week. And most of the campsite had a mess hall, so the troop would have to cook for themselves. So Keith wasn't cooking for the whole camp, just for the dozen or so staff members. And then there were 2 pioneer campsites. If you're really gung-ho, it had no building. You had to cook over an open fire. The mess halls had stoves and sinks and refrigerators, and my job was to keep all that running. So and Bill Kay, the guy I worked for, who was sort of the ranger, I think they called him, he would give me my assignment each morning. Oh, campsite 6, they said the refrigerators don't work, go down there. So I have to go down there and try and fix it. And all I remember was, most days, he'd give me the list. I'd be back at 10:30 and say, okay, Bill, I did all that, what do I do next? And he'd say, you're too fast. So we'd go do something else. And Keith and I had the job of doing the bonfires. Scouts would come in on Sunday and leave on Saturday. So Sunday night we'd have a bonfire, and there was a place across the stream that was there, sort of a natural amphitheater, and it had log seats, I think. And so Sunday night and Friday night, Keith and I would build this fire. We'd do it during the week sometime, lay it up. But there was a platform that you built it on, and these fires were huge. So we'd get logs like this big around and crisscross them, you know, this way, this way, this way, and put smaller stuff in the middle. And they would be, the base was probably as high as maybe 1.5 feet, like that windowsill over there. And the fire itself would be like 10 feet high. It would be huge. And then on each night that we were having that, Keith, we'd get everybody seated, the fire wasn't going. And Keith he was the Indian that did an Indian dance. So he wore a breechcloth, and I think he had body painting, and he wore bells around his ankles, and he did this dance. There's a standard Indian dance they teach the Scouts. You do toe heel, and the bells ring, jingle, and you do. I think he had rattles that he rattled, and he'd go up to the sky and down around the fire, and then I had.
Can you imagine tattooing that?
I had I had a battery back and behind anybody with wires going up into the fire, and then had a nichrome wire that gets hot when you put voltage across it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'd stick that in the middle of a whole bunch of kitchen matches. So I'd have this all set up there with tinder all around it. So when Keith finally got to the magic moment, I'd touch the thing to the battery and the fire would boom start. So the kids could never figure out how we did this.
Early David Copperfield.
Yeah, right. So that was such
magic.
fun. So Keith and I really enjoyed building those fires. Toward the end after the second year, we're starting to run out of wood really around the area. And there were a lot of pine logs that had been cut apparently years ago. So you can get the pine knots, they'd just be sticking out of the ground. Just an odd shaped thing like this. And they'd be full of sap. So you'd throw a lot of those in and they'd make a lot of light.
Okay.
That's the whole idea of the fire, was just light.
Mm-hmm.
Then they had a whole agenda with other people did on the staff. So that was our thing. And one time we had a huge rainstorm and the stream came up really high. Normally there was a dam there where everybody could swim and do boating. This was pretty small scale, it's not huge. But this time we had a huge rain. It was basically a flash flood. And the water came down, it was going right over the dam, and the stream went all these boulders and rocks and everything, but the water was very high. So Keith and I decided, well, this is a great canoeing opportunity. So we got in a canoe and started down the stream. And we're doing pretty good until we came to this suspension bridge where the guys that ran the oil fields I talk about, a lot of times the stream would be in the way, so they would stretch a cable across the water from one tree on one side to a tree on the other side, and another one about 5 feet above it. So they'd walk across on the lower one, holding on the upper one. Well, we come around the turn, and here's one of these bridges. Well, instead of being 6 feet in the air now, the cable is about this far off of the water. So we both duck into the bottom of the canoe, and the only problem was I left my paddle sticking straight up. So the bridge catches it, flips us over immediately, and the canoe goes down the stream, and I come up sputtering, holding my hat and my glasses. Keith actually had the canoe, so he got the canoe off on the beach there a little ways downstream, and somehow I think the paddles were actually tied on. So we resumed down the stream. And so across the road about several miles down, so there was a store there, so we called back to camp and said, here we are, come get us. But that was pretty crazy. Could have easily killed ourselves. And in those days you didn't have garbage trucks or anything, so we dig a garbage pit. So Keith was out of garbage space in his pit, so we had to dig another one. It was very sandy soil, so it was easy to dig in. So we started digging, I don't know what time of day, and got dark. We actually had a lantern, I guess, eventually, but I guess I can't remember if we had a ladder. No, I don't think we did. So we just kept digging until we couldn't throw the dirt out anymore. So we were like 12 feet down or something. So then we started shouting at the rest of the staff, hey guys, get us out of here. Of course, you know how that would go. Not a chance.
Yeah, right.
So they gave us a really hard time, but finally got us out. It was dark by then. So we had this giant garbage pit that they could start throwing things in again. As I recall, there's no fence around it or anything, so I don't know.
That's it. That's interesting.
Then Saturdays, all the campers would go home and nobody would come back till Sunday, the next day. So the staff had Saturday night. And for some reason, people seem to think we really liked watermelons. So the campers' parents would typically bring watermelons for the staff. So I never ate so much watermelon in my life as Saturday nights. And then the staff, we were alone there at the camp, so we could do what we wanted. So sometimes we did things that were on the edge, like we'd go out and shoot frogs. And or actually we'd gig them, you'd stab them with a thing and cut the legs off and cook them. So we'd eat frogs' legs.
Oh. Yeah.
Keith would cook them up. He had a cleaver and a big block. So he'd lay the frog out, chomp the legs off, and then chomp them in half. And I don't know what else he did. He didn't skin them, and then you bake them or fry. I guess we fried them. Fry everything.
Yes.
And one time, I was out in the woods and heard a rattlesnake. Big, it was like this big around, probably that long. And so I came back and we had a snake stick, which is a stick with a string that went through a hole across the front of the stick, then made a loop and then came back through another hole. So you could safely put the string around the snake's neck
kinda.
like a noose and grab it. So I brought the snake back. So we chopped his head off and cut him up and ate it.
My.
Rattlesnake meat.
I didn't know you could eat rattlesnake meat.
Well, of course, the saying is, what's it taste like? Chicken. Yeah, everything is like
Frog's
chicken.
legs.
Yeah.
Yeah, delicacy. What's it taste like? Chicken.
Yeah.
Really small chicken.
That's right. Yeah. So that was with no scouts there. The staff would go crazy. You know, we never let anybody do that normally.
Wow.
And we did build a new suspension bridge over to where the campfire was to be. That was a fairly major project with cables and cross 2x4s bolted to this cables. It was and that was quite a project. And that camp was subsequently sold, I guess, years later to some church group. So I went back and looked at it maybe, I don't know, 30 years ago or something. But I don't know what it's like now. It used to get very foggy there. And the camp had a surplus army truck, a 6x6, which is 2 wheels in the front and 4 in the back. And they were all drive wheels, so it could go through about anything. I can remember one night we'd gone up the road to get something, and it was dark, and the fog came in, and we could not see anything. The only way we got back was one of us would drag our foot along the side. One had a foot out each side, and we'd say, "Oh, we're hitting the shoulder," so you go back. You could slide it along on the pavement, and then when it went off the edge, you'd have the driver correct. So we went very slowly, needless to say.
Oh my goodness.
Finally got back to the camp. So that was Camp Kaufman.
And then the jamboree.
Yeah, that's a big deal too.
That was a big part of Keith's memory. Was that Boy Scout jamboree? That was huge.
Right.
Yeah, okay, you've got it. 20,000.
Yeah.
20,000 scouts.
Yeah. So.
Is that like the National Convention of Scouts or something?
Well, sort of. It's international, actually.
Oh, okay.
And so it was sort of a giant camp out.
Uh-huh.
And scouts came from all over the world
Oh.
and all over the U.S. So Keith and I went. I mean, you had to apply to go, and of course it cost money. And Jerome, Ebner, and Skip Beals. And we went to Meadville, Pennsylvania, which is about 40 miles from Hamilton to get on the train. And we rode in sleeper cars, Pullmans, and each car had a black porter who took care of you. So it was the same as the railroad would for anybody that had the money, except it was the whole train was scouts. So it had baggage cars where you
Was
put
this
your
a special
packs.
train they put
Yeah.
together?
Oh
Okay.
yeah, no, it
Okay.
was totally dedicated to this the whole way to California. So, and we were really excited. So it was hard to sleep. But I remember when we came into Chicago, which I think we were asleep. I don't know what happened. The train really hit something or stopped, but we all slid to the end of the thing. It was like crash, and everybody slid in their bunk and either hit their head or their feet, and we never did figure out what happened. So we stopped in Chicago and saw various sights, and then we switched to same train, different railroad. Went to Colorado. I don't remember all the things we did, but I know we went up Pikes Peak, and went to the Garden of the Gods, which is in Arizona. It's all red rock formations, beautiful area. And then we went to Arizona and saw the Grand Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
I still have pictures, if I could ever find them, of the usual trick pictures you take, that Keith is hanging over, not really over the edge, but over a log that looks like it's on the edge, and you take a picture like he's hanging there. And this took, I don't know how long it took us to get to California. Probably a week.
2 weeks, I'm thinking.
Oh, maybe, I don't know.
I mean, a week out, a couple of days there, a week back.
Oh, the whole thing was almost a month, I think.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
maybe 3 weeks at least. So, but the train just kept moving except for these excursions, and the Grand Canyon is not really on the main line, so you have to go off
Okay.
to the north about I don't know, it's quite a ways to see that. And there was a band from our area that I was in, and there were like a bunch of guys from New Bethlehem, I remember, was the leader, which is a town near Hamilton. So there were all of us that played instruments, probably 10 people in the band or something. So we played for various things. And then it was, and when we were there, we went to Catalina Island. That was really fun.
Mm-hmm.
I've been there since. I mean, it's everything that I saw has really totally changed now, of course. But
What a great adventure.
oh yeah, and then we were on this ranch that was just grass, but basically grass growing in sand. So I remember the Hamilton News asked us to write articles. So I can't remember whether I was writing them or Keith and I were writing them, I'm not sure. I remember writing, though, that we lived in sand, we ate in sand, we slept in sand. Sand was everywhere. You couldn't get it out of your clothing. And you were in tents.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a sea of tents. I mean, this is hundreds of acres. And so one of the main activities was trading with other scouts from other parts of the world. So we took beaver sticks, which is sticks that beavers cut up to make dams in Pennsylvania and other places. So they're typically the ones we collect for like this long and maybe that big around, and the beaver had gnawed the ends off, so you could see the beaver teeth. So we clean them up and varnish them, and then so we trade those to other people who had similar type of things from their areas, and you'd swap badges or patches like your Colonel Drake Council thing, and we also had little containers of oil from an oil well in Emlenton that was the longest producing oil well in the world. It had been continuously producing since it was drilled in the 1800s.
Wow.
And it's like any market. Some things became more valuable than other things.
That's right.
You know,
Yeah.
It's like any market. You never knew which was going to be the most popular.
Yeah, that's right.
Keith
One
was
of these,
always-
you get 10 of those, or you couldn't give this away. So I don't remember
Yeah.
what. I think our things weren't high on the scale. But
Yeah, Keith was very interested in, I think, in the economics of the thing. You know, I mean,
yeah,
no money.
right.
No money changed hands, but this was
Right.
What was the value and why?
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
Exactly.
I can see that.
So that was that. That was, and I think everybody in Hamilton thought that was really great. We had articles in the paper, and
That's a big deal.
yeah. And when we have class reunions, people still bring that up, or they say, "Oh, I still have all the newsprint and all the clippings from your jamboree trip."
Well, that, I mean, to leave Emlenton, that was probably, was that your one of your first trips out of state? Is it?
Well, to go that far for sure.
Right,
We used to go to New Jersey a lot, so I'd gone there, but
right,
that was
But
about
you
it.
were also without your parents.
right.
That's right.
That's the
Yeah.
I
first.
mean, you had chaperones, I'm sure,
right,
but
right.
but-
yeah.
It was the best field trip ever. Is what it was.
That's right. Yeah.
That would be very
I
memorable.
could just see you little boys having so much.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That would just be. Well, I mean, Keith always talked about that trip. That
Yeah.
was just way big in his memory. Way big.
And I can still remember the first breakfast we had in Chicago was scrambled eggs. And they were, I don't know if they were powdered eggs or what, but they were really runny. So I thought they were totally disgusting. You know, not like my mother makes at all.
right.
No fried egg sandwiches either.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. So, I guess,
All right, we need to jump back
Y-
up there to
yeah.
Dan Lim's farm.
yeah. So, you guys getting tired? This is
No, this
going
isn't
on
good.
and on.
Oh, keep
Good.
going. Keep going.
I'm
so-
learning so
I know
much.
you're tired.
Well, I'm doing all right. So, my grandpa Lynn, who was my mother's father,
Okay.
had a farm 2 miles west of Emlenton, which is actually right by the truck stop now.
Okay. Okay.
In
You've been to the Quaker State truck stop, haven't you? You've been.
yeah. In fact, my grandfather owned all that
Is there
land.
any other place to eat?
No, there's not. That's the place. Yeah,
that's
exactly.
it now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I was saying my grandfather owned all that land,
Oh, nice.
and he sold it to whoever, probably for nothing. So we used to love to go up there, and well, my family, not with Keith necessarily, but sometimes, pretty much every Sunday we'd have Sunday dinner up there with Aunt Helen and my grandpa Lynn. And Grandpa had worked in the oil fields, and he had lived in Maryland and somewhere out in the Midwest, and I don't know where else. And then he had become a carpenter, so he's sort of a jack of all trades type of guy. He'd built houses, and he always had stories to tell. And he's probably the only person I've ever known who never repeated one. So I just love to talk to him now. He was born in 1875, so by the time I was, like say 1950, some of this stuff, he would have been 75 years old. So I only knew him from 70 up, basically. But I worked with him a couple of summers when I was real young. He paid me 10 cents an hour. And
Ooh.
this was on
Child labor laws.
on our house in Ocean City. We enclosed the back porch and put steps up inside. So, and for the first, I don't know how long, month at least, all I was allowed to do was pull nails out of lumber that we pulled off and straighten them, because in those days it was a total reverse of today. The material was the expensive part and labor was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So you reused all the nails, you reused all the lumber that you could, and so it was my job to pull those nails and straighten them so they could reuse them.
No, and the mentality too was you didn't waste things in that time. Now they call it repurposing.
Yeah,
but
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I used to beg him, Grandpa, I want to pound some nails in. I'm tired of this. No, not yet, he'd say. So I learned a lot about construction from him. And so we went to Ocean City and did all that. And that, I guess that, I have that as a topic somewhere. But I guess I was at the farm. So the farm, that's where Aunt Helen was, which is basically...
So Helen was your mother's sister?
Sister,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So Grandpa Lynn was her father. And she ended up just caring for him. That she went to college in the 30s and became a school teacher, a 2-year program at that time, and taught at a school back what they call in the bend. It's a bend of the river, but the roads and everything followed it. And so she was actually living there in the same place.
Okay.
And walked to school across the fields, which was probably a couple of miles anyway. And it was a one-room schoolhouse, 8 grades, with pot-belly stove. And one of the kids had to come in early and fire up the stove in the wintertime. And so that was where she taught. And so she had so many stories about teaching. If boys were bad, she would whack them on the hand with a ruler. And so she tells about one time she had, of course you always have guys that are, problems, acting up. So this one guy was bad. I don't know what grade he was in. So she went to whack him on the wrist or on the hand, maybe on the hand. And he pulled his hand out and she hit her watch and broke it. So I guess everything just went dead silent. But then she just started to laugh. So everything was okay. And that guy came to visit her forever.
Oh, did he?
I'll be okay.
The problem student came to visit his teacher.
Exactly.
That says something about your aunt.
But I do understand that Helen was a force to be reckoned with.
She was unbelievable.
That's
I
fine.
mean, I'm walking a couple of miles to work every day in the snow.
Yeah.
Right, she had me right there.
Yeah, right.
She was, from what Keith said, of course, I think Keith loved her more than,
Yeah.
I mean, that was his one female figure.
Yeah, right. She was like my second mother, and probably Keith's too.
But
But
yeah, Aunt Helen was such a.
she was what had happened was during World War II, she married a guy, Tom Fall, who was in the reserves, or the National Guard actually. I think it was the same as now. You were hoping if you joined the National Guard they wouldn't get called up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they did, and he ended up dying in Europe. He was with a bunch of guys from Butler, another town nearby, and they were with him, so they knew all about what happened, but they had to leave him behind enemy lines. You okay? And actually, then they went back across the river. They went back the next day and he wasn't there. But then an interesting side note is Nancy and her son Danny went to that area of Belgium, I think it was. This is maybe 10 years ago or less, maybe less than that. And went to his grave, which is in one of those giant cemeteries. And then they did a tour of this forest area where all this battle took place. And so the guy that did the tour had actually been in the German army.
Oh.
And knew about all the stuff that went on. So he was sure that the Germans would pick wounded guys up, no matter which side, and take them to a hospital, a field hospital. So he was sure that that's what happened to him. It was very common. And so they would treat them no matter what,
Sure.
you know, which side. But apparently was not in that good a shape and he didn't make it. So anyway, that was the story.
And so Helen never married.
No,
Helen, I mean, never remarried.
no, she never did. And she really had some mental issues due to all this. And finally it ended up that she, through whatever, decided to live there with Grandpa Lynn, who needed. I never knew either of my grandmothers.
Okay.
They both had died in the 30s. So he had nobody. So she sort of took over for him and lived on the farm there. And so she used to, she had a bread man that came once a week to the farm. That's what you did in those days. You bought bread from a guy that drove around in a truck. And he was the conveyor of jokes.
Okay.
So Helen always knew jokes. And yet they were always sort of on the edge. Or they had double meanings. Like she used to tell kids when you're at the dinner table, she said, now eat every bean and pee on your plate. And so
Took me just a second.
Yeah, right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And my signal was off.
Yeah. Well, that is an absolute classic Helen joke. She loved those double meaning things.
Oh, that's great. We have to
And
remember that.
so, and she used to drink beer with the guys.
Oh yeah, that's the story about those little ponies.
Yeah.
I remember Keith said they took like a 12-pack of these little ponies.
Yeah.
They were gone.
Yeah,
Even
right.
He said he had 2 or 3.
Right. Then she used to keep something hard under the kitchen sink, and nobody knew about it, or supposedly. So,
Yeah.
oh, I gotta get a drink of water. So she got there, be gone quite a while. And now there's more than water involved. And I remember one time she got really mad at Nancy. I don't know what Nancy did. But Nancy ran out the door, Helen right after her. So, and they're both in their bare feet. They're running out across the plowed cornfield. Nancy's barely keeping ahead of Helen. I don't know what she's going to do if she caught her or what happened. And
well, the other side, though, is Keith had a story about years later, I think, probably after you were born or something, he went up there to see everybody, and he went by to see Helen. And it was wintertime, and it was snowing. And when she realized who was coming to see her, she runs out in her bare feet in the snow,
right.
just to hug him.
I'm sure she would.
Yeah. Because she was so glad. I mean, she hadn't seen him in a
loved
while.
Keith,
And, it was just, She didn't care if she were barefooted or
Yeah. Hey, listen, she was it sounds like she was a
I
tough
never
broad.
honestly met her, but I feel like I know her
Yeah.
because Keith talked about her all the time.
Right. Yeah. God, I can't even think of more Helen stories, but there were a lot of them. And all the kids in the family loved her. So, if you wanted a beer, you're 15 years old. It wasn't a big issue.
Yeah.
And they heated with coal stove, belly hot. Well, it wasn't. It was called a warm morning coal stove, and so she had to fire that up every day. And they had gas too, which came from an oil well up the road, their own well. But the gas you get out of an oil well has a lot of moisture in it. So in the winter, that line went along in the ditch beside the road, wasn't really covered up. So the gas line would freeze. So then you had to heat water on the coal stove, buckets of water, take it up and dump it on the gas line to thaw it out. So Helen would get the water heating, and then we'd carry it up there, or whoever was there, and thaw it out to get the gas fires going again. And eventually they stopped doing that and bought gas from the gas company, which didn't have that issue. So that's and Grandpa Lynn didn't drive. He did drive way back in the 30s, but once he almost got stuck between the gates for a railroad crossing and had to break through the other one to get out.
Oh, no.
That was it. He never drove again. So Helen had to drive him everywhere. And she had this 46 Chevy coupe, with two-door with a great big trunk. So he'd load all his tools in, and Helen would drive him off wherever he was going. And so she pretty much did all the cooking and drove him around and whatever needed done. So that was, and Uncle Mont lived next door. There was a house next door. So another Dan Lynn's sons, or his son, Mont was the one that worked for Alvin.
Okay.
Mont was a salesman. And so Mont used to have these corn roasts every summer where Mont always had a big garden, and he would always take vegetables and things down to where he worked and give people things. But every summer he'd have this big corn roast, which was mostly drink beer and eat some corn.
Yeah, an excuse to get together and drink beer.
That's it. So they'd have a big bonfire and put chicken wire over it, and then throw the corn on top, unhusked, because it would steam basically, because it'd be damp inside the husk.
It was still in the husk.
Right.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. It would steam it.
Yeah. And it would get burned on the end sometimes a little bit, but nobody was paying attention to that. So those were really raucous times. And so us kids would join in, and of course you could get a beer or two you know, on the side was no one even noticed. So he lived there, and then he had 4 kids, my cousins, and 2 of my cousins I was very close to. Dan Lynn. Dan's the one who lived in Savannah.
Oh, okay.
And Sam, who lived in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
He was the chief of police in St. Petersburg for 10 years. And they both passed away now. So that was sort of the story of the farm. We actually lived up there one winter, took the bus down to school and so
Okay.
forth. So Keith was up there. I don't remember him being there that much then, but you know, we were back and forth all the time. So we exhausted all the topics, not quite. I guess the river, that's the next topic.
Not the
That's-
stream that overflowed with but the river.
No, the real river. And the river is never had a lot of white water. It has eddies, which is the places where it's fairly deep and slow flowing, which would be right in front of the town, for example. That's basically why the town's there. And then there's riffles that are faster water going down to the next eddy.
Mm-hmm.
And riffles could be, I don't know, a quarter mile long or a mile long, where it's relatively shallow and fast moving water. So we did a lot of things on the river. Alvin always had a motorboat with an outboard motor. And so you'd power around in the eddy. And I don't know if we ever fished much. A lot of people fished. And then if the river was high enough, you could go down over the riffle to the next eddy and go down like to Foxburg that was downstream, or Parker that was further downstream. And then you had to get back, of course, going upstream. That was where the problems started rising. So, and in those days, the outboards had shear pins. So if the propeller struck something, it would shear this pin that was about as big as a nail, but soft metal. And so instead of damaging the propeller, it would just not be attached to the motor anymore. So if you sheared a pin, and you got good at this, you'd throw the anchor over, which was sometimes a cement block or nothing fancy. You tilt the motor up and you could get at the shear pin and change it. Then off again you'd go. So you always carry a dozen shear pins with you. So you'd be coming up the riffle, and if you weren't in, you got so you could spot where the deepest water is. It was either that or you'd never make it. Then if it got shallow, it'd start dinging on the bottom, and that's when, if you weren't careful, you'd shear a pin, and then you'd have to start over. And we so we used to swim in the river, and people had sort of docks. Usually they had wheels on them, though, so you could, as the water went down, you could push them out further. And right there, the river was fairly, it got deep gradually, so you could have a dock out there, and sometimes they have planks, this rickety thing going clear back to the shore. Try to walk out there and then get in a boat was a good trick. And Keith and I built a speedboat once, a boat about 8 feet long, not big at all, and we had, well, the motor was whatever the motor was. We didn't have any super big motor, but that thing went pretty fast because it was very light and small. So we had fun with that one summer. And then one time after a rain, when the river had been high, we found this metal rowboat that was buried in the sand.
Oh.
It was about probably 12 feet long or something. Metal boats are unusual. They weren't usually, well, a lot of them were aluminum, but this was nice rounded bottom boat. So we dug it out of the sand and basically took it. I'm not sure where. It must have been when we had the Roshi Wagon Works.
Yeah.
And cleaned it all up and soldered up all the holes and painted it nice dark green. And we used that boat for quite a while. Then we actually took it up to the farm and put it in a pond there.
Okay.
So we used that boat up there for a long time. And then Keith and I love to canoe. So, and the Boy Scouts had canoes. We had bought about 12 canoes by selling charts of the river.
Oh.
And the way that they made the charts by taking topographic maps that had the sections of the river and taping them all together and then putting them on wouldn't have been a Xerox machine then, some kind of machine that would reproduce them. So these charts were pretty big. But one did the Allegheny River from pretty far up, I think, to Pittsburgh. And so we sold them for $1. And that's how we made money to buy the canoes.
To buy the canoes.
Yeah.
Enterprising young men.
Yeah. Well, this was the scout troop and the scouters, the older guys' idea, but they did all the work really. But we were the ones that went out and beat the bushes to sell charts. So then we got these Grumman 17-foot aluminum canoes, and so we used them a lot as a scout troop, but also you could use them yourself. You just asked them, whoever was in charge of it. So Keith and I, a couple times, this is when we were older and driving, we would go in 2 cars and drop one car off at some point up the river. Then we'd have the 2 canoes on the other car. And we used to drive up to New York State. The Allegheny River starts in north central Pennsylvania, where there's a spring actually, and then it flows north into New York State and then back down and eventually to Pittsburgh.
Oh.
So what we did was we could put the canoes in the water up in New York State where the river was pretty small. In fact, you had to be careful that there was enough water that you could get over the riffles. A long canoe draws almost no water. And then I think at that point we could buy beer in New York.
Ah.
So we'd each put a case of beer, and we had 2 canoes. Each of us would have a case of beer and our camping gear and food. And so we'd set off down the river. And the river was really beautiful up there, and for miles it went through an Indian reservation. So there was just nothing. And then you come on down to Pennsylvania, and now that whole area is, they built a dam in Pennsylvania, that Warren, the Kinzua Dam. So all the places we canoed is like under 100 feet of water now. So we'd go down the river, canoeing, drinking beer occasionally, and pull off on the bank and camp overnight. And you had to watch out for poison ivy and snakes. Then we'd keep going, and we'd go about maybe 20 miles a day.
Wow.
So we'd spend several days to get down to Tynester or somewhere above Oil City, and then pull out and do the whole swap around. And a lot of times the wind is usually up the river, so it'll be against you. Sometimes it'd get very strong. So 2 of us would get in one canoe and tow the other canoe. Because to make a canoe go straight if you're by yourself, you have to do a J-stroke. So you do a pull, and you got to push yourself sideways. So, because when you pull hard, the bow goes this way.
Right.
Then you got to pull it back
Yeah.
to go straight. So we made at least 2 trips like that, a couple of different summers. So that was one of our favorite activities.
Drinking beer and canoeing down the Allegheny.
That's it.
And camping and watching out for rattlesnakes. Or catching one and eating it.
Yeah, right.
Having it for dinner.
Right. Yeah. I'm about done. So you guys about to pass out here again?
No, I'm interested.
Okay, what else we got to go? I think we've covered almost everything. Oh, I guess the last page I was saying, we had a cottage in Ocean City that we bought in 1945. My family had gone to Ocean City since the 30s, which is about level with Philadelphia, but on the shore, 10 miles below Atlantic City. And it was formed by a church group in about the early 1900s. So it's dry. Still to this day, it's very much a family resort. There's another Ocean City in Maryland. People sometimes get mixed up. That Ocean City is like nuts. It's like Las Vegas on the water. So Keith went down to Ocean City with us a couple of times, and he and I would go fishing just off of docks. You have to walk about 6 or 8 blocks. We lived on, this place is on Bay Avenue. It's about 8 blocks deep from the bay. It's a bay behind it. Mm-hmm. It's an island, and the ocean on the other side. And we would fish off docks, and my deal with my mother was, as long as I cleaned the fish, she would cook them. So
that's reasonable.
Is this where Nancy lives now?
That's where she lives. It's the very same place. Yeah, Nancy, my sister's lived there forever now. She's lived there for a long, long time.
I think I went there when she got married.
Yeah.
Keith and I went to her.
That's right.
Her wedding.
Yeah, she's been married like 3 times.
Well, I'm not sure which.
Yeah.
Which one that was.
That was McNamee. And her husband's died. That was the sad part. So we'd go to the beach and ride bikes and do all the things that kids did. Go to the boardwalk. There's a big boardwalk with ice cream and hot dogs and rides. And the thing I like there is is no longer there. A big hotel on the boardwalk had a big outdoor pool with salt water.
Ah.
So we all learned to swim in that pool. This is before Keith came down there, was coming down. So that was...
Wait, so you did all these river trips and not knowing how to swim?
No.
Is that, am I to understand that?
No,
okay.
no.
Okay.
I went to Ocean City from when I was like 0.
Okay,
So
all right, good.
I learned to swim when I was 5.
Okay.
Or whatever. Yeah, no, I've always been a really strong swimmer. Keith is an adequate swimmer.
That's funny.
So, and I remember one of our trips on our way home, my mother loved to go antiquing. So, and this is before there were any interstates, so you went on all back roads. What would be back roads now? And I remember we stopped at this one antique place, just a big old house in the middle of nowhere. And so it turned out, Keith and I must have been about 11 or 12 at this point. And so we were telling my mother the whole time, oh, we'll never get home, you drive so slow. We'll never get there. And then about then this place shows up. So we go in this big old antique place, and it turns out they had books, old books.
Oh.
And Keith and I we've always read. Still to this day, I read, unbelievable number of books. I'll read anything. I used to read the back of the cereal box if nothing else is in front of me. So.
Oh, he always had 2 or 3 novels going at one time.
Yeah,
always.
that's what I do too.
Always.
Yeah. So that it just happened. I'd given one of these books to one of the kids down here. This is the book. So we love these books, and it's a whole series. We must have had 20 of them or 30 of them. I don't know. And you'd pay like 10 cents each.
Right.
Kind of like the Hardy Boys, early Hardy Boys
Same
mysteries.
idea,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I don't know if the Hardy Boys were even around. They were about that time though. Although this is the Boy Allies were in World War One, so they did all these amazing things.
Oh, okay.
And you know, I read them later. I was reading this one lately, and they did things that are clearly, you know, impossible. But when you're 11 or 12 years old, that was just great stuff.
Yeah. Everything seemed possible
That's
at
true.
11.
Right, right.
That's the beauty of youth.
Yeah, that's right. So then we get back in the car and we're telling Mom, we're going to be really late getting home. It's like a 10-hour drive. I mean, it's not like close. So she starts driving faster. Sure enough, you know what happens? The cop stops her.
Of course.
So she says to the cop, "What do you think of 2 Boy Scouts that would tell you to drive faster?" She says, "I was doing fine and they were just on me to drive faster. So I did, and here I am." So whatever. I don't think he gave her a ticket.
She threw you under the bus.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. So that was
Well deserved, though.
Yes.
That's right.
No, me.
So I don't know if we missed anything, but that sure has covered a lot of ground in a
We
short
covered
time.
a bunch of ground here.
Yeah. I guess I did miss one thing I just noticed. A group of us from Embleton, we were older by then. We went to a lake, Edinburgh Lake, I think it was, for a week. We rented a cottage. It was just like 5 or 6 guys. And we had a great time. But every morning we'd get up, we'd swim clear across the lake and back, which is like a mile each way. So, and we had a boat. I don't know if we did water skiing or not, but we'd go and do that. And then at night we'd drink beer.
Yeah.
And then next day,
Swim it off.
Swim it off. Right.
That to me is balance.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Not exactly the food pyramid, but some pyramid. So that was another thing. Oh, the other thing I noticed here, once that.
Oh, yeah, Barney and Terry Kale.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's.
We used to go over there.
To Knox?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that. I'm so glad you brought that up. I wanted to ask you if you had any adventures over in Knox.
Yeah. Well, it was just an adventure to visit Barney because
Well, yeah, I
he had
remember.
had the junkyard.
Yeah.
And he had junkyard dogs that were really
Mm-hmm.
scary.
Yep.
And he was a character and a half. But so if you needed car parts or anything, you go to Barney. So we went over there once in a while and just visited. And Barney and his wife, I forget his wife's name.
I just drew a blank, and I have pictures of her, black hair.
And she was really
Barney
a nice
and-
person. How she ever got connected to Barney, I'm not sure.
Yeah, everybody asks that.
yeah.
Well, I understand she was beautiful in her younger days, that she was a very nice-looking woman. And everybody said, why did she pick Barney?
Personality.
Right. Yeah.
Seriously. Now, did he live in the apartment above the garage?
Yeah.
Because that when I first met him as a kid, that's where he was, and then apparently he bought the houses down the street, owned the property or something
I
over
think
there.
I think he owned quite a bit of.
Oh, he owns half a
Well,
nine
now
today.
you know that picture, yeah, of
I mean,
Levi.
Terry does now.
Yeah. But the picture of Levi Kale that you had that we gave Terry. Remember when he was down, and it had Alvin and Barney as babies.
Oh my
and
gosh.
Levi Kale in front of his general store in Knox with the horse tied up to a post.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I gave it to Terry when he was down last time, and And we found it in one of Dad's.
Where's Terry now?
He's in Knox. He's running his
Oh,
dad's
he-
business.
oh, he-
You
oh,
tell the
that's right.
house. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
owns half a Knox
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, he does.
Right.
I don't know what he does with it, but
Right.
I think he's just like his dad.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We were never sure what Barney did either, but seemed to survive whatever it was.
Yeah, there was a lot of stories about Barney and
Yeah, boy.
taking.
What a
Yeah, it was.
character.
You're right. No matter what you did with Barney, it was an adventure.
That's right.
From what I know. Yeah.
He was a personality. That's what it was.
Right.
He was just the funniest guy to be around. And you went over there as young boys?
Yeah, we were, I don't know.
Because Knox was considered kind of far away, or no?
Not really.
No? Okay.
You didn't go there often, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's probably 10 miles away, I guess. Keith and I would ride our bike sometimes, but I don't think we ever went to Knox. We'd go, of course, to leave Emmleton, you had to go uphill no matter what direction. Well, you could go down the river, actually, it was pretty level.
But then you had to go uphill coming back.
Yeah, well, no, that wasn't bad, but the road was narrow and it was a little scary.
Mm-hmm.
No, well, actually, they all were a little scary. So, but typically we went up Ritchie Run, which was east of town, and we would push our bikes up the hill because they were one-speed, old-fashioned, fat tire jobs, and our idea to lightening them would be to take the fenders off, still weigh a ton. So we'd go up there and then you'd take a right at the top of that hill and go up another big hill and then finally go downhill to St. Petersburg. And then you could take a right there and go downhill to Foxburg, which is back down on the river, down the river from Emmleton. And then coming back up the river road was relatively level. You could actually pedal, you didn't have to push. So with, maybe 3 miles of pushing or 2 miles of pushing, you got a big long ride very fast if you wanted to, down and over the Foxburg Bridge, which was a trestle bridge. It was made out of wood. It was really for the railroad. The railroad was on top, so it had this very narrow planks on the bottom thing that rattled like crazy with cars that you could go across. So we used to do that once in a while. And I guess I got a couple other things I could say. Keith and I used to go target shooting with our 22s. We were probably 12 years old, maybe.
Every 12-year-old should have a 22.
Yeah, right. So we'd walk down the railroad tracks, and you had to, of course, be cognizant of trains. And because there were 2 tracks, you had to be really extra careful because if one train's going by, another one could be passing it. And so you got off to the side. You never stood in the tracks, the blank tracks at the moment, because you never know when another train would come. And usually that would be in the summer. And another thing, you had to look for snakes.
Okay.
Copperheads used
Copperheads.
which don't make any noise like a rattlesnake. They would lay along the inside of the track where it's toasty.
Oh, because it's sunny.
Yeah, sunny and warm. The track would be warm. And so you had to really pay attention that you didn't get bitten by any one of those.
Did either of you ever get bitten by a snake?
No.
That's
I
pretty
don't think
impressive
so.
Considering the outdoorsy lifestyle
Yeah.
that you lived.
Maybe the closest thing was water snakes, because they would bite, but they weren't venomous. And the scary thing about them is they'd be underwater, so you don't even see them. Sometimes they came up. Most snakes, when they swim, they stick their head up.
Yeah.
But these guys could go down a long time, so you may not even know one's around. So that was a scary thought, but didn't really deter us that much. So we'd walk down the railroad a mile or two, and then there was a place where there was always a steep bank off to the hillside. So we'd have cans with us. We'd sit it up there and shoot at cans. We were pretty good. We didn't really shoot anything else scary, like at animals or crows, or shoot up in the air, which is not safe.
No.
Then it used to be fun to put coins on the track.
Oh, to have them smushed by
Have
the.
them squashed out so they'd be oval in shape.
Uh-huh.
And then you could put the track bed was limestone, so you could lay a limestone on the track, and actually when it hit it would flatten it out to about 1/8 of an inch thick. It was pretty solid. So I can remember us deciding at one point that that's what Japanese planes are made out of. I don't know how we came to this conclusion.
They were made out of limestone?
Out of this crushed limestone,
Oh.
with layers of it. They would just fall apart.
Oh, man.
So what other things? Oh, yeah, Keith and I, we had quite a lawn mowing business for a while. And this is no power mowers. This is real type mowers you had to push. And we mowed the one lawn for the school. It was right next to the Sheffer Chevrolet. We mowed the church lawn. And then we mowed lawn for this couple, the Lynns, another Lynn, distant relative. And it was funny when, we got paid by the hour. And so we worked pretty hard. We didn't really dog it or anything. But if you went to Mrs. Lynn to get paid, she would say, now that's 1.67 hours. Let's see, that's, $10.33.
She didn't round up.
No. But Mr. Lynn, oh, you did a nice job. I'll give you $15 or whatever it was. He always paid much more than she did. So we always tried to go there when he was around. And what else do we do? And there was a place out the road in Nickelville. No, not Nickelville, I can't remember. That made ice cream. Homemade ice cream.
Oh.
And Fye's, F-Y-E, I think. Or was it Fry? I think it's Fye. So Don, Keith, and I, and Bill McQuiston would go out there sometimes. We'd each get a half gallon of ice cream and eat the whole thing. Delicious ice cream. That was fun.
Half gallon each.
Each, yeah. Can you imagine? I mean, this was not ice milk or
sorbet. It
or
wasn't sorbet.
No, definitely not.
Because you were burning a ton of energy.
I was going to say, my goodness gracious. Now, do you have any memories of when you and Dad started driving when you were 16? Like, who had cars and where did you go? And or what did you...
Well, Keith had they had one car typically. And later on, Don had a pickup truck, a green 53 Chevy pickup, I think it was, which we used to all ride in sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But Keith didn't have a car of his own until way later. And so he had to sort of run, fly under Alvin's rules about checking the mileage and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't always go very far.
Yeah, but I always said, he lived a charmed life to grow up in the 50s when your dad is a car dealer.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Right.
It couldn't be any better.
Yeah, right. You would think so, but actually,
Alvin probably
didn't really come out that way.
Yeah. I know.
So I had a car. I had a Jeep station wagon that I got when I think I was a junior in high school. So I was more likely to have a car than Keith was. And I can remember taking my driver's test when I was 16. We started off to take it, and then there was something wrong with the car. I can't remember what it was. Of course, there was no automatics in those days, all stick shifts. So I came back to the house, and my neighbor sees me, Mr. Bittenbender. He says, oh, you can't take your car? He says, well, just take mine. He had a Plymouth something or other, which I'd never driven in my life. But he says, you'll be fine. So I took that down there and took the test, passed it in a car I'd never even driven in. But I don't remember Keith taking his test. I don't remember the details of how that happened. By this time I was in Seneca and he was still in Emlenton. So we weren't in and out so much. Then the road to Oil City had a feature called the Nickelville Dip. This was which was basically a stream, and the road went really steep down, then up the other side. So the local thing was to go as fast as you could through it. I can remember going with Don Kale in his pickup, going like 90 miles an hour through that dip, and that was pretty exciting. Usually we didn't really drive. I don't know. We didn't drive that fast. I don't think that I remember. Except I can remember that vividly, that Don really gave it the gas.
I think it's pretty impressive that you survived your childhood, as idyllic as it was.
Right,
I mean,
right.
you guys had so many adventures and so many.
We did.
You did so many things.
It's surprising though, nothing ever happened to anybody that I can. Not in Emlenton. In Cranberry, that high school was bigger. I know one kid died in a car wreck when he was in junior or something. But generally, people were safe. Oh, I used to do crazy things with a guy up there. Bill Colgrove lived down the hill from me. He had a 39 Hudson Terraplane, which was a really old car, and it had this was in the 50s, so it wasn't that old, I guess. But it had a gear shift controller that was like a stalk off of the steering column, and it had a little paddle and an H-shaped thing, so it was electromechanical, so you didn't have to shift on the floor or on the column, just this thing you could flip. And
wow. So
Bill used to say to me, how do you burn out? He would say, how do you spin the wheels? Which he would try to do in his car, and I'd tell him, all you're going to do is break an axle or a drive shaft. But he and I had this really scary thing that we'd be going along the main street in Seneca, and we had this arrangement: if you flashed your lights twice, it means the road was clear in either direction, and we'd swap sides and pass on the opposite side of the road, and then go back.
Thrill seekers.
Yeah. So sometimes somebody would see us. I don't think a big person ever did, but one of our compatriots, what are you guys crazy? That was fun, a little scary. So I guess I'm running out of my...
I think you've done a beautiful job here.
I think this is
I think,
an amazing gift.
If you get me going, you'll be sorry. You'll never
This is
escape.
just wonderful, George. Absolutely.
I was thinking of that same guy, Bill Colgrove. He and I were both in the fire department, and there was a fire in the middle of the night down on the River Hill, halfway between there and Emlenton, I think. And it was just a totally black night. So we went down there and you wore these Indian tanks, they called them, which is it's 5 gallons of water, maybe 6 gallons, pretty big, on your back. Then you had a hose and a pump, and so you could pump. And so we're running down this path, and it's pitch black. And Bill's ahead of me. And suddenly I realized he just disappeared. Turns out the path went down and then took a left. But he went straight, which is over a cliff. So, which is about probably 15 feet high or something. So I hear all this crashing down below. He broke his arm, bottom line. But luckily I just had time to stop and didn't go over the edge. But, so we had pretty exciting times on trying to climb around on the river hill.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to get at the fires was persons
By foot.
With these tanks, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
How much does 5 or 6 gallons of water weigh?
it was at least 50 pounds, I would say. But of course, when you're like that, we were probably 18. We didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think Don had a wreck on his bicycle going down River Hill once. So this would have been, if I remember, I don't think it was Keith, I think it was Don, somehow got his foot in the spokes of the bicycle.
oh my God, yeah.
Or something, you know.
Yeah, I
And
don't know. Could very well.
And it was
happened.
because he was going too fast down the River Hill. I
Yeah.
mean, he was on the road, but
Right. Oh man.
yeah, something like that. I think that's the way the story goes.
People from Ohio, which that would be the first big hill you come to if you're coming Ohio, which is flat mostly.
Mm-hmm.
And they get to the Hamilton Hill, it was infamous. So you get, all of a sudden you realize there's 10 cars ahead of you going down that hill. Sure enough, it'd be somebody from Ohio going about 10 miles an hour, creeping along the edge of the road.
That would be me.
Yeah.
I mean, when you know that when I first went, because I grew up in Texas, or I started driving in Texas.
Right,
you know.
right. So it's a little
This
different.
business of these hills,
Yeah.
and at these turns, and that.
Uh,
Even today, I don't like North Georgia. I mean, I don't like driving up there. you
Yeah.
know. It's just
yeah.
Well, don't ever go to West Virginia, because it is unbelievable. I just drove back there from there a couple weeks ago, and it is just like, it's just winding,
Yeah.
and it just drops off.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
And a lot of times there's no guardrails.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was white knuckled. Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
It was scary driving. Yeah, very scary driving. So.
I guess so.
well. Thank you, George.